So today I'm going to be discussing Mahler's Sixth Symphony, um, specifically the first movement, the exposition. Now, this piece was composed in 1904, and believe it or not, writing this piece, according to Mahler, took him to the brink of suicide. And the reason why I mention that is because a lot of the harmonies and grotesque elements of this piece, it's very evident that you can make that connection to his emotional stance. Additionally, this was composed at a similar time of his song cycle, Songs of a Wayfarer, which he composed as a reflection on his self and feeling like he keeps trying and trying, but he always ends up in the same place. And the harmonies in this piece really reflect that, and we'll discuss that shortly. So just to make sure everyone can see this Word document, right? Okay. So as most of you might know, Mahler, aside from being an amazing composer, was also an extremely talented conductor. So Mahler had all this classical music stirring in his mind, and it's very evident in his music. As you can see, the first movement of this piece is in a traditional sonata form. But of course, Mahler takes many liberties, being that he is Mahler. For example, the development is in the original tonic. It's not in the new key. And Mahler uses a couple very recognizable harmonic devices, but he Mahlerizes them. So first we have a Petal Tonic, and Mahler introduces, can everyone see my cursor? Great. And Mahler introduces this major 6/6 chord, which, believe it or not, is the key of the S theme, right? The secondary theme. So Mahler, in a sense, is foreshadowing this key change right off the bat. So the opening is very militaristic, very grotesque. So as Mahler is pedaling on this one chord, he is still evolving this beginning, like Brahms' Second Symphony. There is a lot of dissonance, but the pedal really keeps it together. In this next example, Mahler expands on a cadential 6/4. And I didn't even attempt to put Roman numerals because it actually, there is no function to these chords whatsoever. But the voice leading is quite creative. Mahler explores B flat minor and C minor. But in a sense, this dissonance is justified because of the tempo and because of the voice leading and the overall cadence. So our ear understands what's going on. So here's what this part sounds like. Oops, sorry. So very interesting way of getting back to one. And as I mentioned before, Mahler's emotional standpoint while writing this piece is he kept feeling like, he kept trying to make a career as a conductor. He kept trying to get hired, but he had so many faults in the way, his depression, his anti-Semitism. So he found that he always ended up in the same place. And Mahler expands this idea as the piece continues. So in this next section, Mahler uses augmented triads in a very interesting way. So as you can see here, Mahler has this augmented triad spelled with an E flat, and he sequences up, but now he respells it as a D sharp, which brings us to C major. Not only is he using augmented triads, he's molding augmented triads with major seventh sonorities. So it adds a sense of levity to it, and it doesn't sound so augmented and whole tone like. So together it sounds like. And then next, Mahler goes to this German, going to a 5-6-4. But as you know, we're not in D minor. We are in A minor. So Mahler keeps going. He continues downwards. And then Mahler opens up. He goes to this 1-6 chord in D minor. And then he goes back to minor. And then the Neapolitan, which he explores many times, he uses that to bring us back. And then we're back in 5 of the original key. So as you can see, the way that Mahler uses augmented triads is very similar to, for example, how Strauss uses common tone diminished seventh chords. He uses them in a very transformative way. He maneuvers between sonorities, and he uses chromaticism to tie together these vastly related harmonies. So this next section, the part that made me fall in love with this piece, is the transition to the S theme. So I'm going to play the orchestral recording of just this section and take a look at the voice leading and the different voices, and keep in mind that this is meant to bring us to F major. And also listen to how Mahler quotes the original theme in the pizzicato. So this isn't even like the main material. This is the backing material, and it's still very prominent. And just a warning, it begins really loud. So here goes. Yeah, so pretty good stuff, I might say. So what's happening here, first of all, Mahler uses major and minor in a very thematic way, which of course sounds, not so deep. But as it continues, he ties it into these other elements within the transition section. So if you look here, Mahler is bringing back that 6/6 sonority with this expansion of the 1. He ties this to, I'll show this other green section here. Next time he adds an A flat, right? He's expanding his horizons harmonically. He's going to all these different places. And then next time he goes to D flat. So he ties together, which is a very, I guess, neoclassical way of thinking. He ties together these very intricate and new sonorities with familiar gestures and contours. If you look here, Mahler has his sequence. Sorry. Which again brings us right back to 1. You'd have no idea that it's going back there, but when it goes back, it feels like it makes sense. Yeah, so some more chromatic motion here. This part I found very interesting because this is like a super contrary motion progression. You're expecting this to go here, but Mahler resolved this to an augmented chord. Right, so the way that Mahler uses augmented triads, as I mentioned before, is very new and interesting. Right here, Mahler uses this charismatic sharp 4/3 suspension, which is very recognizable. We all love the sound of a suspension. But he comes from a D major chord, which I found quite interesting. Finally, with the way he uses augmented triads, is he introduces like a 5 augmented of A, but instead he brings it to F. So while listening to this, it did not abruptly go to F, in my opinion. And there are a few reasons why. So first of all, what Mahler's doing is he's inverting this augmented dominant chord, which can be recognized if you put this in an inversion. You can have C, E, G sharp, which is a 5 augmented of the new key. But not only that, so as I mentioned, this is in a sonata form. And Mahler knows a lot of pieces in sonata form, as he conducted a lot. So there's no way that Mahler would just abruptly go to F major. So the way that Mahler goes to F major is not linear. In fact, it's ulterior. So I created this chart to explain how Mahler goes from A minor or major to F major. And as I mentioned before, his use of major and minor is basically the same as capital letters and lowercase letters. It's just like a different perspective on the same thing. What's important is the root and the coloration of these roots. So every single triad has a part on here, which is every chord in the transition, right? So as you can see, this arrow, red arrow with the 1 coming from A going to F, that was the beginning. And it goes back to A. So what this shows is Mahler's favorite places of modulating. Instead of moving linearly the way Beethoven or Mozart or Schubert would, through using pivot chords and through modulating within to bring us to the new section, Mahler treats each harmonic change as like a dramatic event. So we remember these different sonorities, and overall he brings us to F major. So for example, you can see A and F. He goes from A and F a lot because he's introducing the old tonic and the new tonic, and he's making a mental note in the listener's ear. So when we arrive at F, we say, okay, that's a very recognizable sonority. But as you can see, he also explores other areas. I mentioned he goes to D flat, but he went to D flat and then he went right back. They didn't quite work for him. But he still explored this area because he wants this to be like an outlier, as opposed to G major or D major, which has a lot of action. And Mahler understands the syntax. He understands classical harmonic syntax. He understands tonic to dominant to predominant. Tonic to predominant to dominant to tonic. He understands the syntax, but he breaks these rules, as I mentioned, overall. So he understands, which functions have priority over others, and he uses each function a certain number of times to create an overall essence of how he transitions to this S theme. So shockingly enough, he uses A and F the same number of times because he wants an even oscillation between the old key and the new key. So when we arrive at the new key, it's not so shocking. However, he uses F one additional time, and that's when he arrives at the S theme. Next to that, 8 times, he uses the 5 of the new key. And I have a little bit under a minute left, so I'll wrap it up real quick. He uses the 5 of the new key more than the 5 of the old key because we are already familiar with the old key. So Mahler wants to push forward into the new key, without, as I said, doing it linearly and saying, okay, how are we going to pivot here? What's a creative way of moving there linearly? He does it overall in a collective way of cadencing. And that's how I would explain what is a Mahler sonority, right? We say, you know, what is the sonority of Beethoven or Strauss or Shostakovich? This is, to me, how I would define Mahler's sonority. He uses familiar harmonic gestures and he molds them together in an overall, to create this overall story. And you know, you can see Mahler's struggle and his triumph, and how he celebrates the mere act of composing within the music. And that concludes the end of my presentation. Thank you.